you know that in each culture is different. Now that we have one of our members that it's from London, it's different. They make jokes, and sometimes for us it's difficult to understand those jokes. You know, because for them are really funny, and for us they may sound a bit rude. So I would like to know, like, how does this work on culture and language and countries and
right. So this is taught in hostage negotiation around the world. So these skills work no matter what culture you're in, no matter what language you're speaking. I will add a caveat to that, because sometimes when you're in a different language, the wording might not translate exactly the same. So you have to work a little bit to make sure that you're conveying the same message that we're saying in English. I know I worked with a Canadian one time who was French speaking, and he had a hard time with some of this stuff because of the way the labels sounded when you said them in French. So we had to kind of come up with a little workaround for him, and he was able to do it just fine. But hostage negotiators all over the world use this stuff with great success. They use it on anybody. And the reason why it works that way is because we're dealing with human behavior and emotions. So it's the human nature response that we're speaking to when we use these skills. So if you are coming across the right way, if you were coming across with the proper tone of voice, and you're using the skills as we describe them to you, you shouldn't have an issue with it. Now, there are some things, and when we get to accusation audit, you'll see what I'm saying, but you do a list of accusations audit at the beginning of a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, to Sandy's point of being able to kind of stop inappropriate jokes, right? Whether that's gender bias, because I saw that in the chat, they said too. Whether they're gender bias jokes, inappropriate cultural jokes, right? That people think are okay, right? That's kind of why this label is great. You can use it for several different things, right? If someone's making a joke, an inappropriate joke about your culture, you can say, it seems like you think it's okay to joke in that way, right? Or it seems like you thought that was an appropriate joke to use with me, right? And it gets them to stop. And then they have to report for their behavior, essentially.
One that works a lot too is my favorite go-to label, seems like you have a reason for. So you can go with, seems like you have a reason for thinking that. Seems like you have a reason for saying that. Seems like you have a reason for feeling that way. Or if someone asks you a question that you're not really sure you want to answer, because people do ask lousy questions, and you want to make sure you know where this is going before you give an answer, you can say, it seems like you have a reason for asking that. Then they'll explain to you why they're asking, and then you'll know exactly where to go, and it'll save you time in the long run. But that seems like you have a reason for label also works with the inappropriate behavior, especially when you're just kind of creating the thought pattern interrupt. Because if you say to someone, if they've said something off color or inappropriate to you, or tried to take the conversation in a direction you don't want it to go, and you say, seems like you have a reason for saying that, and you just go silent and then let them think about what they just said. And I've had this happen before where they realize it and then they say, oh, I'm so sorry. And then they realize how they've kind of stepped over a line, and they will back off of it. And it's better for them to get the hint from you and back off of it so that you don't have to go to that very assertive, pushy label, like when you completely address the behavior. It seems like you think it's okay to call me that or to refer to me that way, because that's more assertive. So this seems like you have a reason for it is a great one to kind of fall on in almost any situation, because you just put that verb in there, looking, feeling, saying, whatever it is, and it'll work with that label. So is there anything in the chat that we need to address?
No, I think we're just chatting in the chat. So
okay. It's great. It's where that chatting is supposed to happen.
Yeah.
All right. So we have labels. We've talked about labels, how you use them, but why? Okay. Why labels? Why are they one of the fabulous 5 for us? They play to our intuitive strength. Women are really good at picking up on the underlying dynamics of a conversation. You're much better at discerning the why behind. Part of that is because women are good listeners. So you can listen and you can get sometimes a double meaning from things. And this is why women sometimes, when you're in a conversation, when it starts going off the rails sooner than other people in the room, because you're able to see those dynamics and how things are going. And, you know, I blame some of that for how women have been treated all through the years, but you see when the car starts going down the wrong road. Okay. And that's a horrible thing to say, because don't we always yell about men for never asking directions? And I just like use that. It almost sounded like a pun, but you just have an ability as a woman to observe and get the feeling for those dynamics that are underneath the situation that's happening. So that's why labels really do play to us, because we can label that dynamic that someone else in the room might not be able to see. This also allows you, when you use a label, to take that deep dive. Okay, you can deep dive down into someone's psyche, and it doesn't feel as intrusive. So this allows some space in the conversation that keeps the other side at ease. And Davey, if you want to speak to that, because
yeah, because here's the thing, labels, anytime you have a question in your mind, you can turn it into a label. And that's kind of what we recommend doing, actually, is because a lot of people can feel threatened by questions. And they feel like, oh, you're interrogating me. Like, have you ever gotten that, right? Like, oh, am I in an interrogation? You're like, no, that's called a conversation. But the thing is, you can just you can label instead. And that's a really great way of, no one's going to be like, oh, am I in an interrogation? Just turn it into a label. So let's say that you were thinking, okay, I really want to know more about where this person is at with the deal, right? So you're thinking, okay, I want to ask them, like, okay, how long do you think it's going to take to talk to your team about this, right? You can say, it seems like there's kind of a process to talk to your team about this. Like, it might take a couple of weeks. And then they end up telling you everything that you wanted to know. But exactly. they're still at ease because you're not asking them a question.
And this does speak to being able to get information from the other side without feeling like, one, you're interrogating them, two, you come across as threatening, or three, you come across with that mom feeling, you know what I mean? That, like, your mother, why did you do this? Where are you going? What's happening? You know what I mean? So you don't want people to feel that from you. So you can get information by using a label instead of a question, which is how we gather the information, just like Davey said. And you don't come across as threatening in any way, because let's face it, powerful women do come off as threatening sometimes. And it's not a good way to be, because when you come off as threatening, it really turns off the other side. Because one of the main things that helps our skills work is being likable. Coming off likable, one of the ways you do that is by avoiding direct questioning and using labels to gather information so that you do come across less threatening.
This video is about labels, the ultimate negotiation tool. Sometimes we think of it as the ultimate MacGyver tool. What makes it a MacGyver tool? Well, a MacGyver tool is really simple and incredibly effective, ridiculously effective. To do your labels right, you got to keep them simple. Stick to the format. It seems like, it sounds like, it looks like. You seem, you sound, you look. We have a great negotiator that loves to say it feels like. Stick to that simple format. We're intentionally leaving the word I out. I is a thought interrupter, a pattern interrupter. When you use the word I, it draws attention to yourself. It interrupts the other side's thinking, and you're using labels to gather information. We know from negotiation they add this to gather information. The crazy thing is, asking questions is not always the best way to gather information. Labels work well more of the time than asking questions do. Labels trigger stream of consciousness reactions. You might say to somebody, what are you thinking about this? You might label them instead and say, seems like you're giving this a lot of thought. Or it seems like you're thinking about something here. Or it seems like you saw some things you like. Either one of those is going to trigger a much more unvarnished flow of thoughts from the other side. One of the people who's really learned this stuff and is doing a great job of applying this in the real estate area calls it unlocking the floodgates of truth talk. Happens to be a woman that's applying this and seeing the insights, and not the least bit surprising because women have a tendency to pick this stuff up faster than men do. That doesn't mean men can't be great at it also, just that for whatever reason, women seem to get a head start on understanding this and applying it really quickly. This is emotional intelligence-based negotiation. One of the crazy things about this is that when Brandon and I brought these hostage negotiation techniques out of hostage negotiation into the business world, we didn't think labels were that big of a deal. I can tell you now that we both use them so much that we can work our way entirely through a negotiation only using labels. When you get good at them, you respect their simplicity, and you apply them, you can use them all over the place. One of the main things that makes labels incredibly versatile is the fact that all three types like them a lot. We've done a lot of polling. We've got a lot of reason to believe that the world pretty much breaks up into three types: assertives, analysts, and accommodators, across the board, regardless of gender or ethnicity. We probably polled at least 2,000 people in this regard. We got a fair amount of data. And in polling all these people, and in different classes we've taught, we frequently run exercises where we ask them, of the 9 negotiation skills, which skills would you most prefer your counterpart use with you in order to make a great deal with you? All three types pick labels as number 1 or number 2. So while you're still trying to get a feel for the other side and draw a beat on what type they are, labels will always be your highest percentage shot at the very beginning when you're proceeding. And then if you find out that they resonate really well with labels, you just simply stick to them. It's your safest bet, and the way you go from being barely good enough to get by to being a superstar is just by increasing your odds a little bit at a time. Labels increase your odds. Get good at them, practice them simply, practice every day, get your reps in, and they will serve you well. How much practice should you get in? An hour a day. Make an hour label hour. Label at noon. Label over lunch. Label from 7 to 8 every day, whatever time it is. Get your practice in. Make a cheat sheet of labels. Keep it by your phone. Your cheat sheet should especially include labels of negative dynamics. Fill in a blank. It seems like you hate X. It seems like you dislike X. It seems like X is a problem for you. Have those fill in a blank labels by your phone. Have them ready. They will serve you well.
Going down to Joe, what do you do differently if you're preparing to negotiate with someone that's Black Swan trained? First of all, I'm giddy. I'm excited. I'm never more anxious to negotiate with someone than if I know that they've been trained in Black Swan skills. And it's really for a couple of reasons. Number one, our skills are designed to create collaboration in places where it's really hard to find. It's designed to build trust, respect, and rapport in an instant and create a collaborative environment right on the tail end of that. I'm going to be excited to deal with anybody that approaches negotiation in that fashion because we're going to make a good deal. And then the second part is if they are in fact Black Swan trained and I'm as familiar with the skills as I am, and as a lot of you are on this call, it's going to be really easy for me to tell if they're trying to manipulate or influence based on how they use the skills. If they're actively using the skills to cultivate, I'm going to be able to tell. If they're actively using the skills to force issues down my throat, or, which I know a lot of us are guilty of, create the how am I supposed to do that moment way before it's necessary, right? We haven't actually collaborated or gathered much intel between each other, but I can feel you walking me up to how am I supposed to do that because you're trying to put me in a bad spot You want to walk me into that question because you know how effective it is immediately. I'm going to see it coming because I'm familiar with Black Swan skills. And if that's what your intention is, then there's going to be some instant pullback from me. If anything, when I feel that how am I supposed to do that coming, I'm going to fight it. How am I supposed to do that? Sounds like you've thought a lot about this. It sounds like you probably got something in mind that works really well for you, right? If anything, if I find them to be manipulative in the usage of Black Swan skills, I'm going to use the Black Swan skills to punish them. And by punish, I don't mean take advantage or make them feel bad, but let them know they're going to be outdueled, right? You walking me into the how am I supposed to do that moment before you've discovered what my Black Swans are, you're going to feel that if I see your intentions to be manipulative. So that's just something to keep in mind. You know what they're doing if they're trained, right? So you got a huge advantage. If the counterpart's immovable, what do you do when your counterpart takes an immovable stance on one? Great question. First of all, summarizing. Get it, that's right. If they're immovable, they probably got 5 to 20 reasons as to why that is. Explain to them why they're immovable to get a that's right. First of all, it's going to loosen them up a little bit because if you do create the oxytocin moment with that's right, they're gonna be much more likely to, well, here's something I didn't offer to you earlier. Here's a thought that you might want. That's one piece. Another thing, as a last ditch effort, and this is something we haven't really focused on in teaching in a long time, but as a last ditch effort, right? And not all deals can or should be made. You can always say, it sounds like there's nothing I can do to change your mind. It sounds like it's an impossibility for you to want to look at this differently. Sounds like there's nothing I can say to affect your current mindset, right? Even if they're immovable, there's still an emotional moment that is created there, and we need to explore it before we exit or move forward. And then the last part, accusations, audits, using the skills to tie yourself to having caused the anger or high emotion, simply in the form of, it seems like I really upset you. You know, I think, and this has actually got me thinking about another thing in regards to, we're all guilty of, to a certain extent, slapping someone in the face in a negotiation and then looking at them and going, it seems like you're upset, which is a really, really bad way to label. It's actually extremely insulting to be the direct cause of whatever the crux of their issue is, and then label it as if you're at arm's length, right? You hit somebody in the knee with a bat and destroy all their ligaments and then go, seems like you're having trouble walking. We never want to do that. And it can inflame the situation much worse, as I'm sure a lot of you could imagine. And so connecting it to, like, it seems like I really hurt you. Seems like I said or did something that really threw you off kilter. Connect yourself to having cause. You can use an iMessage to do so, a label. The choice is yours.
Remember, you don't get in life what's fair, you get what you negotiate. If you want to become a better negotiator, click the link in the description below.
We have a couple of questions come up. Do we want to go back to the label questions?
Sure, they have label questions, sure.
Okay. So one question is from Ivan. I'm not sure. I hope that's right. So she's asking, can you use it when negotiating promotion? So she said, for example, seems like you do not feel like I'm ready for the promotion, or seems like you would prefer this person get a promotion and not me. So she's wondering what the best way to use that would be without being pushy.
I think both of those labels are appropriate. Labels can be used in any situation, just about, okay? As long as you're using a good label and you're not labeling something that's going to come across as, rude or purposely to make someone defensive, I think you're going to be fine. Every personality type, every negotiator personality type responds well to labels, okay? All three of the types. Accommodator, assertive, analyst, all of them like labels. So no matter who you're dealing with on the other side of the table, a label will be fine. Just monitor your tone of voice. Make sure you put it out there very, matter-of-factly, especially with what was the first label again? Seems like you do not feel like I'm ready for the promotion. Right. So soften that up just a hair and say, seems like there may be a feeling that I'm not ready for this promotion. That way you're not singling out that one person that you're talking to. And instead of saying, it seems like you don't feel like I'm ready for this, it seems like there may be a feeling that I'm not ready for this. That way you're not pointing specifically at that person. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would just, if I can add something real quick, Sandy. For example, if you're wondering like, why am I not being promoted, right? You can use a label to try to understand that as well, right? Like, seems like there's something impeding this promotion. Seems like there's something, right? Like there's some kind of obstacle. So you can address that, and then you'll get to the bottom of maybe why you're not getting the promotion in the first place. One more question. Sorry, that fluffed. Okay. There's one, what if you're clearly being disrespected? So like if someone's like staring at your chest, for example, instead of talking to you in your actual eyes, face. She said, for an example, seems like you're being a pig. Is that a bit harsh?
Yeah, that's a bit harsh. You want to point it out, but you don't want to point it out by actually calling them a name. So what might be better is it seems like something in our conversation is distracting you. And in other words, I know that you're distracted by this and you shouldn't be distracted by this. So I'm going to point out that I know you're distracted, and maybe that'll bring your eyes up where they're supposed to be. So remember, you're not just actually labeling how you feel about them. You're labeling the dynamics of the situation. So if you have someone that's constantly looking at your chest, you can say, it seems like you may be a little distracted. Because then when you're looking right at them and they look at you and they know they've just looked up, they're going to be like, oh, caught red-handed. So, and you might even follow that up with another label saying, it looks like we need to kind of regroup and get back on track and, do it that way. But be careful being quite so blunt and honest. Look for more of the situation that's happening there and kind of label that. They know what they're doing. Okay, that pig knows what he's doing. He knows he's looking at your chest. He's not stupid. He knows he's looking at your chest. So when you say, seems like you may be a little distracted, and you're looking right at him with a question mark, like, are you distracted? And he's going to look up and realize that he just got snagged. Okay, so you want to point it out, but you don't want to, and this is the problem that some women face. When you speak up for yourself, you're automatically categorized as an assertive bitch, and you shouldn't be. So using the labels in a more subtle way will break away from that. And keep in mind, using labels is cumulative. In other words, it's not a one and done skill. Sometimes you have to do it 3 or 4 times to get an idea across. But if you stay in the proper mindset, if you stay curious about why are they acting the way they're acting, and it may be because they're a pig, but you don't necessarily want to point the finger at that right away. They're that way because that's the way they feel like they can act somehow or another through their life. Somewhere someone has given them the permission and told them that it's okay to do that. You don't have to put up with that. You can call them on that. You can say, seems like you're finding something else more fascinating. And I mean, look down like you know where they're looking, and you don't have to point out and say, stop looking at my breasts, and be obvious about it. But you can basically put out there, it seems like you're too busy focusing somewhere else. Looks like we need to refocus on what we're doing, and just be a little more subtle about it. do it with a smile on your face, stay in that accommodator voice, because then it's not threatening to them and you're not going, seems like you're too busy looking at my breast, because then they're going to get defensive. And when they get defensive, you're automatically a bitch in their eyes, even when you've done absolutely nothing wrong. So the way go ahead.
Sorry, Sandy.
No, go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, to that point where it's like, okay, I, hate the idea that like we always have to be smiling or whatever, right? Ultimately, it's just when you're attacking someone. So if like you're essentially calling that person a name, it's just always going to be counterproductive. Does that person deserve it? Sure. That's not what we're talking about, right? Of course they do. But the problem is, it's like, if I want to have a working relationship with this person, if it's going to be more beneficial for me in the long run, which most of the time it is, then I need to understand how to actually make this productive. And so calling out behavior rather than name calling is going to be the more productive route.
Absolutely.
And then Dion had a question, which is, how is it bad to come across as bitchy?
Bitchy, I'm not going to say that it's never okay to be bitchy, because I mean, I'm bitchy a lot. I'm just going to be honest with you. It just has to be done in an appropriate place, in an appropriate way. And when you're in a business negotiation situation or dealing with something at work, you can regulate yourself. You can control yourself and how you act and what you say. You cannot control the other side and what they do. However, you can have an influence on them by the way you use your tone of voice, by the way you hold yourself, and by the way you project yourself. So if you are dealing with someone on the other side of the table who is assertive, if you go at them assertive, which pretty much is bitchy, clash, and you're not going to be able to work it out. Okay. The best way is to go to tactical empathy first, figure out why they're acting like they are. And most of the time it's just because they're being a jerk. So you have that and you understand that. So when you understand that, it's going to help you center yourself a little bit more, not react to that piggish behavior, and instead label that behavior and try to divert it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Would there be a better way to possibly get the same information but not asking no-oriented questions? Like maybe labels, mislabeling?
All right, so what was the question again?
So I'm asking, if I were to ask, is it true, yada, 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 would there be a better way rather than just no-orienting it? Would you use a better tool, for instance? Like
potentially a label, although, there are times, and I'm going to ask you to make it into a label for me. So make it into a label.
It sounds like you've written the book, Never Split the Difference.
Right. Or it seems like, yeah. Sounds like, seems like, looks like, feels like. Yeah. And, and so that is actually a great exercise. If you've got the yes question, you write it down. You want to substitute something else in. Substitute a couple of other skills. A no-oriented question, a label. That's that much more warm up for your brain to get ready. Give you that much more preparation. Because at some point in time when you communicate with people, you're going to find that one of those is going to hit them exactly right. Depending upon their personality, the moment, how much sleep they got, what they had to eat, their circadian rhythm. There's all these different things. One of those skills is going to hit their brain exactly right, and it's going to really unlock a truthful response. The floodgates of truth talk, is one of our clients once said. So I like your thinking, man. You're showing some agility in your thought. Very good. Very impressed.
I tried to come up with as many questions as I could last night, and this is the only one I really could that was really strong. But
all right, good.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right, good. We're gonna move on. Thank you for joining.
I appreciate it.
We have a lovely parting gift for you. You should subscribe to the Edge. All right, thanks, man. Nice talking to you. It was a lot of fun.
So the accusations audit is amazing because it gives you the freedom to do whatever it is that you needed to do, or to ask or address whatever it is that you came in needing to ask or address. And so if you're concerned that that this person already thinks that you're too assertive, right? Already kind of has that preconceived notion about you. then you can just simply say, you're going to think that what I'm about to ask you is really assertive. You might say, you're going to feel really overwhelmed by what I'm about to ask you. You might say, if you're concerned that that you think that you're too emotional, that they think that you're too emotional. You might say, you're probably going to think that I'm bringing emotion into this. And so it helps if that person, you can tell that person already thinks that about you. By addressing that dynamic, you're able to diffuse it. There's a question in the chat that asked, well, what if that person didn't already think that? Is this going to make it worse? Sandy, yeah, I kind of want to hand that to you because I know you have a lot to say.
You can't plant a negative. Okay. If they don't feel that way, they don't feel that way. You're not going to suddenly put that thought in their head. Okay. And even if you do, you're mitigating at the same time. So it's not going to make it happen if it's not already there. So even if they're not thinking that whatever you're saying is going to be too expensive, and you're saying, well, you're going to think this is so expensive, and they're like, well, I mean, they might be thinking money's no object. All they're going to do is just say, well, no, not really, and just go on with the next thing. You're not going to plant that negative. Okay. How you plant a negative is by saying, I don't want you to think I'm being picky, but I really don't like that shade of blue. Okay. You threw it out there. And what's the first thing they're going to think when they hear, I don't want you to think I'm being picky? They're going to think, oh, you're being picky. I don't want you to be mad at me for doing this. So they know that whatever you're saying right now is going to make them mad. Okay. That's the wrong way to do it. So you don't want to do, that's basically, that's the denial. You want to avoid the denial. You want to just point out the negative. You don't want to try and justify it or explain it. So just say, yeah, you may think I'm being picky. I don't like that shade of blue. Instead of saying, I don't want you to think I'm being picky, because that's telling them that they're going to be that way. Okay, that's not mitigating anything. That's actually raising it. So you want to be very careful that you word this correctly, but you cannot introduce the negative. If it's not already there, you're not going to make it be there because you're saying it. So don't be afraid of that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you have more to say about that preconceived notions?
No, just that, that essentially a lot of times we come into these situations kind of fearing like, well, that person already thinks this about me. How can I possibly talk to them about it? Or this person already believes that this isn't going to work. There's no convincing them. It is shocking the power of what an accusations audit can do. It demonstrates self-awareness. It demonstrates concern and care for the other side. Because essentially, when you are giving the accusations audit properly, the way Sandy was talking about, then what you're saying in essence is, I understand your experience right now, and I understand that I'm making this hard for you in some way. And so even if, you're not really, because you're probably not being too emotional or you're probably not being too assertive, that doesn't really matter because it's that person's experience. And so then we're able to subvert those preconceived notions, move on, and continue to make a deal.
Definitely want to stay curious. If you're staying curious and asking, why are they saying these things? Why are they behaving this way? It's going to take away the emotional side of it for you mostly, where you're searching for answers for them. What make them say that? What is making them behave that way? And for yourself, you want to get with a trusted colleague and vent before you go into the room, or before you actually go on the call or sit down across from that individual. You want to vent about all the things that you think are going to happen or going to come up in that room that's going to be an issue. But you want to find somebody that's going to be positive when they talk to you, because if you go in there and they've already fed you full of negative stuff, you're going to have a negative mindset going in. You want to have a positive mindset. And one of the things that Brandon said that is so important, when he was talking about the person getting angry or getting upset, they can only do it for 45 seconds to a minute. If you can hold on for that ride, you're going to be okay. They wear themselves out. They don't realize how much stress and how fatiguing it becomes for them. So when they do that, the longer you can sustain your calm, you're going to wear them down. And they're finally going to just throw their hands up and like, shh. But if you get angry and they get angry, they talk about the amygdala, you're going to have two dumb people in the room, and you can't, and it don't work when you have that.
Right. Do you have any suggestions? He'll have a lawyer in that situation as well as himself. And so I'm trying to figure out how to control both personalities, because one's an accommodator and one's an analyst, I think. And the lawyer is more unknown to me. So I'm trying to figure out how to control those when there's two personalities coming at me at the same time, how to control that scenario.
Labels and mirrors.
Okay.
You just seems like both of y'all want to talk at the same time. It sounds like one has an agenda, the other one has an agenda.
Thank you. That was excellent.
I didn't feel comfortable using the calibrated questions and saying, how am I supposed to do that? So I changed it a little in a way I felt more comfortable. And I would say, like, that's going to be really difficult, and we're going to have to try to think of a creative solution. And then that kind of trying to imply, how am I supposed to do that? And I mean, they talk after it and give suggestions. So I think it's working.
It is working. And here's the difference between what you did and how am I supposed to do that. First of all, how am I supposed to do that is a phase of no. That is an assertive move. So you want to hold on to that for later in the conversation or the relationship when it's more appropriate. But the way you set it up means that you're priming them for it. You're lowering the expectation so that if it does become a how am I supposed to do that, it's not going to be a shock to the system because you've already set them up. So I love the way you're playing around with it. Now you're starting to make this stuff your own, which is the ultimate goal, is to take these skills and make them a part of your repertoire. You say and do things differently than the way that I say and do things. Troy says them in a way that it's different for me as well. Everybody's got their own spin on the Black Swan method.
Yeah, I've seen the ability to take someone off their guard and to have them really disarmed and having an open discussion. And then the slightest little thing can throw that back up. And it's not necessarily something where I say something really difficult to you. Just a slight trigger can bring it back up. And I've been listening to other meetings we have with other people at my office that host those meetings. And they have someone completely disarmed. And then they say something like, hey, I've been in the business a long time too, implying you're not the only one that knows this shit. Right. And then when that happens, like, you had them for like an hour. They were just stringing along saying, yeah, I could see that. I understand that. And then you threw that in. You just worked backwards. So I'm trying to use the ways to keep them disarmed as long as possible. And then when I have to get serious, you drop the tone and say, that is something that will have to remain. And then they know, like, that they're not going to get movement on there, because I've only said that with that voice twice out of 50 other times, you know?
Yeah.
But I've seen people arm up so quick. So I'm trying to be aware of, you can get everything right 90% of the time, and that 10% can completely burn you for all that work you put in.
Yeah, if you're not careful, that can happen. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to drop the bomb on somebody at some point. You're going to have to draw your line in the sand. And so when you're switching into that late night FM DJ voice to convey your assertiveness, remember that assertiveness is the precursor to that should be something from the tactical empathy side of the ledger, as well as the accusations audit side of the ledger. So, I'm sorry. I ran it up the flagpole. Nobody saluted. We just can't do that. I'm sorry. I ran it up the flagpole. Nobody saluted. This is going to catch you off guard. This is going to be disappointing to hear. It's going to feel like I punched you in the stomach. We just can't do that. Vaughn, what do you got?
A similar kind of how am I supposed to do that question. We've been negotiating with the customer for about 3 or 4 months. It's a customer we really do not want to work with, but at the price we would be willing to do so. So we've been going back and forth with them, raised our prices quite a bit. And then they started to do something very interesting. They started picking apart our proposal kind of a la carte. And that was going over about a 2-week span until I went in and I just said, how am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to let you pick apart my proposal like that? And they went completely dark for 2 days. And then Friday, they said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and sign the proposal. So I don't know what the 2 days was. I don't know why it did that. I don't know what prompted that, but it really made them make a decision because all I said was my email was just, how am I supposed to do that? And I just let them stew for 2 days and they came back with a signed proposal.
That's one of the purposes behind why or how am I supposed to do that? Or the other phases of no is for them to go back and start to bargain with themselves so that you don't have to.
Yeah.
It's a thought shaping question. You're shaping their thought. You're engaging the problem solving or the critical thinking portion of their brain. And so that's perfect. Let them go back and stew for 2 days. You haven't told them no, and you haven't offered any other solutions. You have, in essence, told them you go back and figure it out, which is what they did. Nicely done.
And negatives have 3 to 9 times the impact on decision making. Why you won't make a deal with me is 9 times more important than why you will. Isn't that the opposite of all of your coaching in business? What are you supposed to do when you interact with someone in business? You're supposed to give them what? You're supposed to give them their value proposition, right? Isn't your value proposition proposing positives? It's got a third the effectiveness is diffusing the negatives. Labeling negatives does what? All right, so that's what we all feel. He said labeling negatives reinforces the negatives. It's the opposite. Labeling negatives diffuses negatives. Every time. Now, you don't like that for 2 reasons. First of all, you're thinking, well, if it reinforces positives, why doesn't it reinforce negatives? That's just logical. Secondly, you're going to say, oh, no, it does not. Because every time I've tried to call out a negative, it's blown up in my face. And I had a PR guy once says, never introduce a negative. I don't know how many of you remember Richard Nixon when he resigned, but before he resigned, he stood up in front of the American public and said, I am not a crook. Did Nixon label the negative by saying, I'm not a crook? What did he do? He denied it. That's a 2 millimeter shift. Michael Vick is on a sports show a couple years ago. He's talking about another quarterback. And he starts out by saying, look, I don't want to make it sound like I'm disrespectful. And then he made his observation. As soon as he got off the phone, the announcer said, you know what? As soon as somebody says, I don't want to sound disrespectful, the next thing they're going to be is disrespectful. Imagine if instead Vic would have said, I'm sure it's going to sound disrespectful. Here's my opinion. Then he got off the phone and said, you know, that Vic guy's a straight shooter. So the 2 millimeter shift and why we're so worried about negatives is because we've been used to denying them. You cannot plan a negative with a label. What if I say to you, seems like you don't like me. And at that point in time, you don't have that feeling at all. What's your reaction?
No, I like it.
You feel, oh yeah, I like you fine. You don't go, oh, now that you mention it, I do dislike you. This is our single most powerful skill. This is how we get out of this stuff so fast, so much faster than everybody else. This is how Derek is coaching people, diffusing negatives and getting people to resolve deals in 7 to 10 days max that have been struggling with deals for months. I called him on the phone the other day and I said, anybody you're consulting in a specific deal, have you coached anybody in any interaction that's lasted longer than 10 days? He was like, yeah, I don't think so. Anybody more than 7 days? A couple might have gone over 7. 18 months of negotiations resolved in 7 days. with this approach. It's insane. This is the insane superpower. This is why people are killing it.
So when you're labeling, one of the things that we like to talk about is how you label in response to some kind of inappropriate or patronizing behavior. So the first thing you're going to do, if it's appropriate, is redirect the conversation. So this is when the behavior that's coming at you is kind of putting things off track, but it's not offensive and it's not affecting the long-term relationship. So, sometimes you can kind of let it slide. Sometimes you shouldn't. It's what you want to do here is, in a normal label, you're going to ignore the comment and put the conversation kind of back on track. So you're going to say something like, seems like you want to get the best deal here, and refocus them. Seems like your team is important to you. Refocus back to what you're talking about. Okay. This is just when it feels like the focus of the conversation is actually in the wrong place. So you want to make sure you gear it back in the right direction, but you don't want to come out and say something off-putting to the other side, because that's not going to help you at all. So you just refocus a little bit by using that label. The next one is going to be a thought pattern interrupt. This is when the behavior needs to stop. So whatever is happening, it feels like the focus of the negotiation or conversation is turning to you rather than the actual negotiation. So it's disruptive to whatever's happening, and it can be affecting the whole deal. So when you're getting this far, and when it is behavior that needs to stop, it is going to damage the future relationship if you don't take care of it. So what you want to say then is, it seems like you're not interested in whatever, bringing them back on focus a little bit. This makes them consider, hopefully, that the behavior that they're doing may be negatively affecting things that are going on. And you want to make sure you point that out. So behavior needs to stop. So the last one that we talk about, and Davey, please interrupt me if somebody puts something in the chat that we want to talk about. And if you want to add anything, please just pipe up there. Anybody. The last one is what we call a confronting label. This is very assertive. So you want to be careful when you use it, but this is when the behavior needs to stop and be addressed. So remember, redirecting, you're just labeling before it gets off track. When you're creating the thought pattern interrupt, the behavior needs to stop. So you're gearing them another way to stop whatever the behaviors that they've now suddenly gotten into. The confronting label is when maybe those other two labels haven't worked, or maybe it's just gone off course really quickly. So you want to use that confronting label and label what's happening and address it at the same time. So this comes about a lot of times when people take the liberty to call you cute little names like honey and sweetie. And the way you can deal with that, because this is very assertive, remember, seems like you think it's okay to address me that way. So this is when that behavior makes you feel like you need to put walls up against the other side. And I'm sure everyone on this call at one point or another has been in some kind of conversation where all of a sudden you feel like, whoa, this is not going where I want it to go. This needs to stop. This is when this label is going to come in handy. When you address that actual behavior, calling you honey or calling you sweetie, and force them to face up to it. And Davey, I want you to talk a little bit about this because you have some interesting stories about dealing with behavior like this.
I'm going to proceed on the idea that everybody at least understands how to construct a label or a mirror. Labels, it seems, it sounds, it looks. You see me, sound, you look. A mirror is a repetition of the last 1 to 3 words-ish, or specific selection. Once you get good at the last 1 to 3 words, you start picking 1 to 3 words out of different portions of the conversation in a mirror. So everybody's going to pick 2 things they're passionate about. Everybody's going to pick 2 things they're passionate about. It doesn't matter what those things are. They could be food. They could be dogs. They could be bunny rabbits. I know you're passionate about bunny rabbits. Doesn't matter what those 2 things are. You will pair up with someone next to you. One of you will be the talker, the other person will be the negotiator. The negotiator is asked 2 what questions? What are you passionate about? I'm passionate about puppies. What about puppies makes you passionate? That's your second what question. Every response from the negotiator from that point on is a label or a mirror only. It's not, oh, I had puppies growing up. I set it on fire. You know, whatever you did when you were a kid. No sharing of common experiences, because that's not a label or a mirror. And then when we pair you up and you start out, one of you is a negotiator and the other is a talker, stay in role until we ask you to switch out. If someone is not particularly comfortable with the skills yet and they say, okay, I did this long enough, now let's talk about your passion. Now, we don't want you to doing that. We have a very specific sequence going here. These are our reps. How many reps to get a skill? 63. These are our reps. This is the low stakes practice. This is the no stakes practice. Small stakes practice for high stakes results. Here's what it'll look like. Brandon's going to be the negotiator, and Derek is going to be the talker. So at the beginning, you're going to be able to ask 2 questions to get you started, and from there forward is going to be only labels and mirrors. So after I have done 4 or 5 labels with Derek, then we will start pointing to people in the room to continue the conversation with Derek. So once you get pointed at, you got to come up with a label or mirror. A great way to get picked is to look away. All right, so 2 questions at the very beginning. First question, what's your passion?
Coaching basketball.
Coaching basketball. And then second question, what about coaching basketball makes you passionate?
It provides me an opportunity with providing a positive male role model in the lives of guys that don't have it.
Guys that don't have it?
Yeah, the community that I coached in a couple of years ago was an immigrant community, single parent homes, mostly led by women. A lot of times the guys that were on my team were the oldest male in the house, so a lot of responsibility had been thrust upon them. And as a result, some of them, straight off the straight and narrow, unless they were provided an opportunity to participate in organized sports, that's where I came in.
It sounds like in a lot of ways these kids are kind of missing out on life.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was in their spot, so to speak, when I was coming up. I grew up in a house that didn't have a father. In fact, he could walk through those doors right now, and I wouldn't know it was him. That's how early in my life that he left. So I was raised by a mother who had a heart of gold, and she worked very hard, but she couldn't provide me with that male influence that I needed. But by the grace of God, I could have gone elsewhere.
Sounds like you learned how to be pretty self-sufficient at an early age.
I had to. You had to grow up fast. And the things that were out there that snatched me off the streets, figuratively speaking, have been multiplied tenfold now with these guys. So I know that they're either going to wind up dead, they're going to wind up incarcerated, or they're going to wind up like the next Shirley.
Sounds like you really feel for the fact that what they're missing out on really isn't any fault of their own.
It's not. And so for the 2 hours that I get them every day between the months of November and March, it provides me with an opportunity to provide them with some life skills that'll make them better men, because I think as a male adult, it's incumbent upon me to do that. Label or mirror. Label or mirror. I want you to say it looks like, it seems like, it sounds like, and then give me what it looks like, seems like, sounds like. Intuitively, you know what to say. Now I want to make you say it.
It looks like this is really important.
Yeah, it is important to me. Let's face it. These guys are going to get their life lessons from somewhere. And if they're not getting it from me, they're going to get it from somebody in the streets. And then the people in the streets are usually going to send them in the wrong direction. Label or mirror.
Mirror. Wrong direction.
Into the mic.
Wrong direction. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier they could wind up incarcerated or they could wind up like Shirley. And as an adult, again, my job is to make sure that nobody else becomes a Shirley, label or mirror.
It sounds like Shirley's important to you. I wasn't following that part. I had a legitimate question. What do you mean when you say Shirley?
I didn't ask you to ask a question. I want you to label or mirror. Any question that you can ask can sound like a mirror.
Shirley?
Great. Yeah, Shirley was a young lady I met. She was 7 years old at the time that I met her. And Shirley was a crack baby, which means when her mother was pregnant, she was continuing to ingest cocaine. Shirley was born addicted to cocaine. And she had the requisite behavioral and cognitive issues that a baby addicted to cocaine would. So she was way behind in her development. They put her into foster care because the mother was not obviously competent to raise the child. So Shirley was put into foster care, and that's when I met her, label or mirror.
And you met her where?
Not a question. Label or mirror. Any question that you can ask can be turned into a label. So it looks like, it seems like, it sounds like.
Sounds like you had a great opportunity to run into this little girl at one time, and it meant a lot to you.
Subsequently, yeah, it was a great opportunity. At the time, I didn't see it as such. Because when I met her, her foster mother's boyfriend had taken the bottom end of a cane and shoved it in her mouth and broke her teeth out because she spilled toothpaste on the floor. And so when I think about my responsibility to the youth of today, it starts with how I saw Shirley the night that she was on the gurney in the hospital, and I'm taking photographs of her injury. And this little girl that has had everything done to her is laying on the gurney, showing me some cigarette burns on her forearm, and she still had enough sunshine in her to smile. And I said, and I still have her picture on my desk with that smile. And I said, if this kid can go through all of that, she needs a fighter. And so my job is to fight for all the Shirleys of the world, label or mirror.
It sounds like you believe this program can really make a difference in children's lives.
Well, it's a leap, but my basketball program, by extension, will lessen the opportunity for kids to fall through the cracks, either into jail or to have their lives impacted in other negative ways. Now, I'm going to stop there. You guys see how much information you can gather by just using labels and mirrors. If you will imagine, the X that I stood on the floor represents I like coaching basketball, right? How far off of that X did you move me?
Quite a bit.
When I first said I like coaching basketball, figuratively or literally, some of you rolled your eyes and said, oh, another jockhead. Another guy who's going to start talking about the virtues of Steph Curry, right? But what did you learn about me? Travis said, I grew up without a father. What else did you learn? Specifically, what did you learn?
That you help youth.
That I help youth. Good. What else did you learn?
You have a very big heart.
I have a very big heart. Do I sound like somebody you want to do business with?
Absolutely. A lot of behavioral things, how you respond to things.
What do you mean?
Given a difficult situation, you took it and turned it into a positive.
Good, good. What else did you learn?
You want to be a road walker, like you want to give back.
Want to give back. What else did you learn?
Respect your mother.
I respect my mother. What else?
What inspired you?
What inspired me, Monica said. So the point is, you moved me off the X. You know a lot about me. Character-wise, behavior-wise. How much information did you give me? How much do I know about you? Nothing. Just using labels and mirrors. That's how strong they work. That's how powerful they are. So that's what you guys are going to replicate in your one-to-ones.
subscribe to the Black Swan Group's negotiation newsletter, which is free. Doesn't cost you anything. I had a colleague at the FBI that used to like to say, if it's free, I'll take 3. Here's how you subscribe to The Edge if you're in the United States. Send the text to, the number is 33777, that's 33777. The text message that you send is Black Swan Method, Black Swan Method to 33777. Comes to your email inbox on Tuesday mornings when you're ready to rock and roll and get after the week.